Sorry, I was hovering, making sure her voice is captured in this. I don't know if it worked or not. And Jasmine is also interim executive director of the chapter right now. Mute Abdi. Okay, so I'm going to present a bit about basics of Islam, kind of cultural diversity, some of the things to be aware of in dealing with Muslims. I'm going to segue into Jasmine's section by speaking about the broader national picture, and from there on Jasmine will talk more about what we're seeing here in Washington State. The goals of the sessions are obviously for you to get a better understanding of Islam as a faith perspective, of why Muslims do certain things a certain way, and then address any questions you have. So if you got questions of the type of like, why do Muslims do this? This is kind of the avenue for you to ask these kind of questions. But also we have something to ask of you, which is become aware of the problem. This is, Muslims are the nation's largest discriminate against religious minority. There are other ways of discrimination, ethnic and gender, but religiously we are the worst. So it becomes relevant for you guys as you move on with your careers. Islam and Muslims at a glance, just some terminology. So what are we talking about? Islam is the name of the religion. Muslim is the name of the follower of the religion. Arab is an ethnicity and a race. Used to be a race, now is a race and an ethnicity. What that means is it used to be a bunch of tribes that came out of Arabia, but then now, for example, Somalis are considered Arab, who they may be of African descent, but because they can speak Arabic fluently, they're considered Arab. Any country that can speak Arabic fluently as a first language or second language is considered Arab. So Mauritania is another example. Islamic are things, Muslim are people. So you say Islamic calligraphy, Muslim student. You don't say Islamic people like the president sometimes does, and you don't say Muslim thought, for example.
Okay, so it should be Islamic culture.
Exactly. Excellent.
Not Muslim culture.
Exactly. And vice versa. Don't use Islamic in reference to a person. The Middle East is not a label we use for ourselves. It's a label used from people who are apparently west of us. So generally it's a European term. It refers to people east of Europe. So it refers to that whole region, North Africa, this part here, there. So it's actually a mishmash of ethnicities, religions, and cultures. Mediterranean is the region around the Mediterranean Sea. That's also confusing because that's actually North Africa. You've got Turkey, Israel here. You've got southern France and Italy. So it is generally not not very descriptive to, for example, to say to an Egyptian person, you're Mediterranean, because that's like 17 other cultures that are very, very well steeped in and of themselves, like Italians, French. Like Italians don't see themselves as common with Egyptians, for example. Egyptians don't see themselves as common with Greeks. Each of them has 5,000 years of history on their own. So just to be aware. So a little quiz while we're here. Looking at this picture, which of these people are Muslim in your opinion? Top picture, raise your hand if you think they're Muslim. Nobody? Okay. First picture over here. Raise your hand if you think she's Muslim. Okay. Half a hand. One hand between the two halves. And then raise your hand if you think he's Muslim. Cool, you think they're all are. Okay, cool. So this is a trick question. So none of them are. So they're all Arab. None of them are Muslim. The top picture are Christian Arabs from Syria. They're Catholics. This picture are Christian Egyptians from Egypt. She's Coptic. And then he's a Yemeni Jew. It's interesting because most of you raised your hands on him specifically. And they carry AK-47 just like the Muslim men. So, reminder, we've had all kinds of governments in Muslim countries. Muslim countries are not specifically flawed in democracy. There have been monarchies, democracies, republics, dictatorships. We even have a theocracy, Iran. We have all kinds of governments in the Muslim world. And another thing to remember, although we, to avoid the savior syndrome, we've had more female heads of states in the Muslim world than America has. Just as a reminder. Doesn't mean there are not problems in the Middle East or Muslim world when it comes to women, but just they've also overcome certain hurdles. Muslims look at their faith in general as a continuation of other faiths. They see their faith as an Abrahamic faith, as a continuation of a Judeo-Christian tradition. They see the holy book for Muslims, the Quran, frequently quotes the stories of Jesus and Moses. Moses is the most mentioned prophet in the Quran, not Muhammad. Muhammad is mentioned by name 4 times. Mentioned by reference a lot, but by name 4 times. Moses is mentioned by name like 25 times. His story inspires, the story of the Exodus and standing up to the Pharaoh inspires Muslims as much as it inspires Christians and Jews. Abraham, the rituals of the pilgrimage that we'll get to, is commemorating the journey of Abraham, who's technically the father of Judaism, or the grandfather of Judaism. So they see themselves that way, even if some pundits and right-wing groups and whatever try to create the separation and try to create these myths about Muslims worship a moon god, Muslims worship an idol, whatever. They actually truly have worshipped the same. They believe those teachings of Judaism and Christianity came from God. So a Muslim would not be a Muslim if he or she said the teachings of Christianity did not come from God. The teachings of Judaism did not come from God. If a Muslim said that, he would not be a good Muslim. He would not be a Muslim altogether. And we'll get to the pillars of faith in a second. So the main commonalities are the 5 core Abrahamic beliefs: a day of judgment, God, angels, prophets, and holy books. You'll see that theme in all 3 traditions, and you'll see it here. Commonality, a big strong commonality with Christianity is our reverence of Jesus. So if a non-Christian spoke to a Muslim about Jesus, they would think he's a Christian, or she's a Christian, because we revere him, we revere his mother, we believe in the actually miraculous birth of Jesus. The main difference is we do not attribute any divine aspect to him. So to us, he's a messenger. He was a messenger of God, a revered messenger of God with great teachings that everybody should follow. But he himself did not die on the cross for our sins, and everyone has a relationship that is direct with God, that there's nothing someone else can do on the cross or off the cross to alleviate your own sins or flaws. So it's a big difference, obviously, theologically speaking. But if a non-Christian was to be talking to a Muslim, they would think they're Christian, because of how much they revere Jesus. We name our kids after him, we name the most common female name is Mary, and so on. A strong commonality with Judaism is there's very strong commonalities in the laws. So you'll see that Muslims, like Jews, do not eat any pig products at all: pork, bacon, ham. And we'll come to the dietary restrictions later. And overall, Muslims have a stronger adherence to the Old Testament laws than one would say Christians do, in modern Western Christians at least. Differences are mainly around salvation. So for Muslims, it's a direct relationship with God that's based on God's grace, one's good deeds, and one's intentions, why they did the good deeds they did. So there's no salvation by Jesus Christ, so there's no salvation by race or selection by it, and so on. These are the 6 things that every Muslim has to believe in. I'm going to just list them and move on. But there's each one of them we can spend 5-10 minutes talking about. Even the very basic one, the most belief in God for us, that's a big topic. That's the foundation of the faith, that there is a creator of the universe, that one has to, the key element of the faith is that one has to reach the conclusion that there is a creator, that he wants something from us, and then try to find out what that is and try to live their lives according to that. We believe he's the perfection of all good. Everything in the existence happens because of his will. Even if he disapproves, he will allow things to happen, like bad deeds to happen, as part of the bigger test of humanity and of the individual themselves in their lives. We believe in angels. It's a pillar of faith. Even though we don't worship them, we don't offer them any worship, mainly because it asserts the 4th pillar of faith, which is the Holy Book. We believe in angels because the book mentions them and the prophet mentions them. To us, they are invisible servants of God. We don't pray to them, we don't worship them, but we believe they exist because it's important in the faith to assert belief in the unseen. That basically mankind doesn't see and know everything. There are things outside of our senses. There are beings, worlds outside of our senses. And it's important for us to understand that God can create things outside of our senses. This whole notion that if I don't see it, it doesn't exist is kind of rejected in the Islamic faith. That you have to submit that God can. We now know scientifically that the human vision is between violet and red and everything outside we don't see, sound, same thing. We now scientifically concede all these things, but this was 1400 years ago that basically was asserting the same thing, that there are things outside of your senses that you'll never be able to see, measure, or interact with, but they exist. Belief in prophets. Our vision of the history of mankind is that throughout history, mankind would be on the right path and would start to diverge, go in the wrong path, and God would send a messenger from among those people to correct them, to advise them, to try to bring them back on the right path. And we believe every nation has had a messenger. Very important point of faith if you think about it. Islam is the only faith that basically believes that every other nation has had a messenger from God. As much as it's frequent in media to say that Muslims invalidate other people's faith and call everybody infidel, it is actually the exact opposite. Muslims within their faith, in the Quran, clear black and white text, it says, every other nation has had a messenger. It has a very profound meaning because it means I cannot go to a Native American and say, your faith is all bogus. Because it didn't come from Moses and Jesus' chain and Muhammad. It came, we know for a fact that at some point in the past, they've had a messenger from God. And there is an element of the divine in their beliefs. Maybe not all their beliefs, but there is something divine. We can't just dismiss them as there's nothing worth looking at in their teachings and their traditions. We believe in a day of judgment, so there will be a day in the future in which everybody who's ever lived on this earth will be brought back to life to stand before God, and give account for their life, and then are rewarded with heaven and hell. And we do believe in an actual heaven and an actual hell. We believe in revealed scriptures. I skipped over that. That sometimes a messenger would come with a holy book from God that outlasts the messenger. But after the messenger leaves, there's a more lasting book that's left among the people to carry the message. We believe in 5 books by name as having come from God. Something called the Scrolls of Abraham, which we do not know where they are now, but it's mentioned in the Quran. The Psalms of David, the Torah of Moses, the actual first 5 books of the Old Testament, the Gospel of Jesus, the teachings of, not the whole New Testament, but the teachings of Jesus in the 4 books, Mark, John, Matthew, and finally the Quran. So again, same point. You are not a Muslim, not a good Muslim. You are not a Muslim if you claim the Torah did not come from God. So very important thing when you juxtapose that with the right-wing media, Muslims would call, dismiss everybody else's faith. And then divine destiny. This one I always explain to the kids as, how many of you picked your parents? None? Okay. How many of you think your parents are a huge factor of who you are today? Everybody, right? So for Muslims, life is a combination of things that God decides for you. He's never going to hold you accountable for those. And then how you react to them, He's always going to hold you accountable for those. So you were born, your parents hugely define who you are, how you look, how you speak, socioeconomic status, ethnicity, big things that kind of have a huge impact projecting forward on what you're going to be, what options you even can have in life. He'll never hold you accountable for being blonde or not being blonde, for having colored eyes or non-colored eyes, for having dark skin or light skin. But He will hold you accountable for how you reacted to it. So you were born into poverty, you struggled, you decided that I'm going to steal, this is my right to make up for lost opportunity, versus I'm going to work hard to bring my family out of poverty. You were born, handsome and rich and influential, and so you decided to use that to sell laptops to people. Okay, fine. Decided to use it to con old people out of their retirement money. Sin. Decided to use that to call people to do good. Good. So how you responded to what you were dealt is the definition of the combination of choice and predetermination in Islam. These are the 5 things that Muslims should do to be practicing Muslims. You will find, the amusing thing about this slide and the previous slide is that you will find amazing unanimous agreement on these things among all Muslims all across the world. So if you walk into a mosque in Indonesia and ask Muslims, what should you believe in? They will list those 6 things. What should you practice? They will list these 5 things. And then you fly all the way to South America and ask them, they'll say the same thing. And then you fly here and ask them, and you fly in Egypt and ask them, they'll say the same thing. Even though Muslims all these people have never been under the same ruler, the same clergy, the same scholarship. This comes from the power of the Quran in the tradition. The Quran is preserved as it is for 1400 years. There are things that are very black and white and clear in the book. And it leads to this interesting unanimous perspective, when on the other hand people always complain that there is no single Muslim to talk to. Like, who do I talk to when I want to talk to Muslims? Well, frankly, I don't know. 1.6 billion that have no common leader, true. But amazingly, they've reached these very unanimous conclusions when it comes to creed, which is very hard knowing, all the different sects and all the different religions, right? Anyways, so that doesn't mean every Muslim practices this. There will be Muslims who don't pray. There will be Muslims who don't fast. There will be Muslims who do not pay their annual charity or giving. But nobody will argue that these are not what you should do. They'll simply say, I'm not strong enough, I'm working on it. But nobody will say, oh, no, prayer is not part of the faith. Or, fasting is just a thing that, Sunnis believe, not Shiites, or Egyptians do, but not Pakistanis. Everybody will argue that every Muslim should try and live up to these. These form the foundation of being a good Muslim. They don't make you a good Muslim. You can still be a liar or a cheat, but if you are a liar and a cheat and you're doing these five pillars, then you should really examine your heart, right? Are they landing in the right place? They're supposed to make you a better person, right? The first one is the declaration of faith. For people born into the faith, they've said it a million times by the time they're 10, so there's no actual declaration of faith they have to say to anybody. Someone entering the faith, they have to believe it in their heart. You don't have to walk up to an imam or a priest and say it, but it's better if you do so that the community around you knows and they can also offer assistance and so on. So that, for example, if someone passes away, they know to bury them a Muslim burial and so on. But there's no baptism, there's no official action done in the mosque to make you a Muslim. That's the point. 5 daily prayers, we pray 5 times a day, dawn, high noon. These are the times when the prayers start. You can pray from that point until a later point. You don't have to pray exactly at high noon. So dawn, high noon, afternoon, sunset, and evening. Each one has a range, as I mentioned, and each one takes about 5 minutes. So for example, a student in the middle of winter, noon comes at 12, expires at 2. So a student would need some window of time between 12 and 2 to find a place to pray. It takes about 5 to 15 based on whether they need to wash or they already carry their wash from the last time they prayed. So overall 15 minutes, but they need a place, quiet, secluded, and we'll cover some of it later, but kind of that's what daily prayer means. We are also required to give 2.5% of our savings to the most needy. It's not charity if you have to do it, but it is a pillar of the faith. We are recommended to give charity much more, obviously, but this is the minimum. This is kind of the right of the poor upon the rich, that you cannot be wealthy and just sit on the money and not give it away. It is 2.5% of your savings, not your income. So if you're living hand to mouth, year to year, you pay nothing. It's only when people have enough to save that they pay this. Fasting, we fast 1 month of the year. It's a lunar year. It's a lunar month. It moves. Anybody has any idea when it's coming this year? Has it come yet? It's coming. Thoughts? Guesses? No, it's coming. It's mid-May, 15th of May. So it's going to be still a bit rough because by the end it will be mid-June, so the day will be fairly long. I'm not sure how many in elementary will be fasting. There will be some. Maybe not the whole day, maybe part of the day. But definitely start looking forward to middle school and high school. They will be fasting, many of them. Jasmine sent a notification that my stepdaughter loves because she sent it to Rose Hill Middle School, where she goes, asking the PE teachers to take it easy on the Muslim students. So she hates the running part, so she appreciates it. She's going to be fasting from April.
So when the students go out to pray, how much time should the teachers give?
15 minutes roughly.
15 at the most.
Yeah. Obviously, depending on the campus, some schools have very big, long campuses or small. But if the room where they're going to pray and where they're at is fairly close, then 15 minutes. Because it gives, sometimes they need time to wash. So they need to go to the restroom, wash their hands, wash their face, and wipe over their feet, and then go to the prayer hall and then come back.
And the prayer itself is 5 minutes? 5
to 10 minutes, yeah. So, pilgrimage, both Ramadan, and pilgrimage, and even almsgiving are for those who can. So, a common question is, what if the kid is sick? What if the kid is too young? If the child cannot, then they should not. My own daughters, when they first started to fast, because their luck was that it was at the peak of summer, July, they couldn't finish. After 3 days, they started getting cramps in their legs. They were dehydrated. And a child at 10 and 11, you can't force them to drink. Like, you can't tell them, drink more than you need because you're going to need it later. They can't. They just drink whatever at dawn, because we abstain from eating and drinking from dawn till sunset. So an older person, like if you read about NFL players who play in the NFL who are Muslim, they actually fast during the season, or they used to fast during the preseason because it was around July, August. But they would do it by chugging a bunch of food at dawn before they go out to the practice. But you can't get a child, a child doesn't get it. So for example, we had them stop. Like after 3 days, we told them to stop. Just fast till 6 p.m. and stop. That's fine. You don't have to go all the, because it was, sunset used to be 9 p.m. Right? So it was a very, very long day. So pilgrimage, once a lifetime, a Muslim is required to go to Mecca to do a pilgrimage where we, as I mentioned, we kind of give homage and we relive some of Abraham's journeys to Mecca. So those of you familiar with the Old Testament, he had two sons, Ishmael and Isaac, and he left Isaac in the Holy Lands in Palestine, and he took Ishmael down to Mecca. And so we commemorate some of the things he did there. The first time he dropped him off with his mother, second time he visited him, a third time he visited him. In the Muslim tradition, it was Ishmael that was almost sacrificed, not Isaac. In the Jewish tradition and Christian tradition, it's the opposite. During pilgrimage, everybody coming into the perimeter of Mecca, before they even get into Mecca, they have to change into simple garments. They cannot wear jewelry, they cannot wear perfume, they cannot wear fancy clothing that are stitched together, embroidered in any way. So everybody wears very simple outfits, which is a very powerful equalizing experience. This is the experience that set Malcolm X back on the mainstream Islamic path. Before that he was Nation of Islam. When he went to the pilgrimages, when he revised his assumptions about the evil nature of the white man. I'm going to skip the quotes. You will have the slides. So these are just some powerful quotes from the Quran, some powerful teachings from Prophet Muhammad. This is one of my absolute favorites. It is enough evil in a man's heart to feel despite towards his brother. That's enough evil. Like, you don't need sins, you don't need to lie. Or if you feel you're better than someone, you genuinely think you're better than someone, just by being who you are and who they are, then that's something enough for you to worry about. Like, you don't have to worry about, more major sins. Basic statistics, so 1.6 billion worldwide, only 18% are Arabs. Remember the picture at the beginning? Of Arabs, only 82% are Muslim. 18% are Christian. Some are Jewish too. Very important to remember, the original Christians were Arab. Sometimes that is lost into, like, it's always heartbreaking when you see like right-wing groups hate on Arabs, when they're the first Christians to begin with, right? Regardless of the Islamic angle, right? The majority live outside the Middle East, so actually South Asia is the biggest chunk of Muslim people. India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, that area, that triangle. And then Indonesia is the largest Muslim country in Southeast Asia. And Africa is called the Muslim continent because more than 50% of the total population of the continent is Muslim. These are some basic statistics about Muslims in America. There's about 100,000 in Western Washington. This number is a little wobbly, like it's a bit of guesstimate and extrapolation. Not all, we didn't go out and count. We're trying to fund research to do this. A lot of them are refugees. About 60% are refugees from Somalia, Bosnia, Iraq, since Washington is fairly accepting of refugees. Nationwide, there's 3 to 10 million. The number is again wonky and wobbly because Pew puts us as little as 3, Care National puts us as up as 10 or 12. The truth is somewhere in between. When there's not a very good, again, not very solid research on how many Muslims are there. This is about the ethnic breakdown of each of the major faiths in America. Muslims, Protestants, Catholics, Mormons, Jews, big black bars, whites. So you see Muslims are actually almost evenly divided between African Americans, whites, South Asians, Southeast Asians, or East Asians, and so on. This one is about income equality. It's important to challenge the notion that that Islam somehow inherently teaches lower opportunity and lower respect for women. So these are Muslims. This needs a little bit of explanation. So this is lowest income women, highest income women, lowest income men, highest income men across the board. So for example, you see that among Muslims, it's almost 25% consistently. So basically the top earners, the low earners among men and women are almost the same distribution. Okay? These are women making under 2,000, women making over 5,000. Men making under 2,000, men making over 5,000. Okay? Same numbers across the board. So you'll see, for example, the massive skew here among Jews, for example, versus Mormons, versus Catholic, versus even the U.S. general population compared to Muslims. So Muslim women in America are actually fairly educated and have fairly good jobs compared to the rest of the population. So one could argue, well, these are westernized Muslim women. It's the westernization that's giving them the equal, not the Islamic part. So the same study from Gallup, this is 2008, asked the same people, how religious are you? Or how important is your religion to you? And Muslims came second after the Mormons. Mormons 85, Muslims 80%. So this is not to bash the other group, but this is to say that actually Muslim women in America are doing fairly well despite being religious. And Muslims are the most satisfied with the country. So we'll show you another slide in a bit about actually discrimination in schools. But despite discrimination, they have the most faith in the country. This is 2017, after Trump came to office, by the way. I want to make some decisions here because I don't have to. So prayer, I'm going to talk about some diversity training about the practice of Muslims. I'm going to try to go fast. If you have questions about them, make note of them, and then we can address them in the last 30 minutes. Because she has 30 minutes where she's going to talk about some actual cases of discrimination in Washington, and then we can get back to questions across the board, my section or her section. So this one is about prayers. Again, they need a clean place to pray, a prayer rug. The girls will very likely, maybe even the boys, will prefer a place out of sight. The girls more sensitive because when we prostrate, our butts stick out, so they may not want to be exposed. But generally, even the boys may be shy about the fact that they're praying and their schoolmates are not. Need about 10 minutes, 15 total with washing travel time. Some may wash themselves, their hands and their feet with water at the sink. It's fine to tell them you need to clean up after yourself and not leave a puddle of water and all this stuff. Depends on the school of thought. Some can wipe over their socks and some need to wash their feet. So without getting you tangled into all of that, that doesn't mean they have to leave a puddle and a mess on the sink. You can request that they clean up after themselves. Friday prayers is the big service for Muslims. It's not Sunday. So some parents, and I know some groups of parents do it in Sammamish or Redmond, East Redmond, where they take their kids, or they do a Friday sermon. So we're supposed to have a sermon before we pray. So what they do is they take the kids out for 30 minutes. One of the kids gives a sermon to the others, and then they pray, and then they go back to class. So, but I've seen it only in Redmond or Sammamish. I'm not sure whether the other districts are doing it or not. So, fasting. So, in terms of the impact of fasting in school, so obviously be aware that some kids will be fasting. They may refuse meals, may refuse. It's a very beautiful gesture to remember that they're fasting when you're handing out food. So, for example, if you're giving away cookies for whatever reason, if you give them theirs wrapped in a bag and say, hey, you can eat it later, that's a much more powerful gesture than no cookie for you, you're fasting, right? So that would be nicer if you can. At the end of fasting, there's a celebration, and then at pilgrimage time there's another celebration. It's an opportunity if you want them to speak about what Eid is, and depending on the culture they dress differently. They make cookies, they make savory foods, they make bread with thyme on it. Depends on the culture, right? So it's an interesting opportunity, especially if you want to encourage them or their parents to come and do a show and tell, or maybe both of them together. It's a good opportunity. Yeah.
So is that your biggest celebration?
Yes, two of them. The biggest one is the one after the pilgrimage. The one after Ramadan is also important, but the biggest one is the one after pilgrimage. And this year it would be in the summer, you don't have to worry about it. But in a few years it will be in the school year. Dietary restrictions. So, practicing Muslims generally are not supposed to eat any pork products, any pig products, or any alcohol, generally speaking. Hopefully kids don't consume alcohol, but things made with alcohol are not infrequent. Tiramisu cake half the time has rum, apparently. Not in Italy, but here. So Muslim parents will be very crafty about, oh, this thing has gelatin in it, and gelatin comes from boiling the ankles, whatever, all that stuff. So they know all that, and they will tell you. Some will just tell you, treat my kid like a vegetarian, and they'll just skip all meat. Some will say pescatarian, so fish is okay, everything else is not. Because some Muslims, within Muslims themselves, there's a disagreement. I'm from the majority segment that just eats any meat that's not pork. But some will only eat meat slaughtered according to Islamic law, which means kind of like the person has to mention the name of God, has to be slaughtered a certain way. And that's kind of like kosher with the U and the D and all that stuff. And so some are like that. And if they're like that, they will generally, from the school, they will just say, treat him like a vegetarian, don't give him meat. And even then they may have pickiness about the cheese and what kind of cheese and stuff like that. Generally, ask the parents, don't assume. So, very, very important, because there are some who are not as sensitive about, I don't know, marshmallows or something, Jello or whatever, versus some who are. Some may be up to date and know that Skittles no longer uses animal gelatin, but some may still think it does, so they'll say no Skittles. Just ask the parents, hey, we're serving X, is that okay? Modesty. For modesty, I'll say both genders are required to dress modestly. I'm sure that's not a purely Muslim concept, and I'm sure that most parents want their kids to dress modestly in general, putting all religion aside. And some parents struggle with like the way all parents struggle, where they want their daughters to dress a certain way or their sons to dress a certain way. And they change the way they dress when they come to school and blah, blah, blah. Do you tell on them? Do you not tell on them? Same problem. Some may have hesitance to do physical interaction with the opposite gender. So generally speaking, we try to avoid physical interaction with the opposite gender if they're not either, a sister or mom, someone I can't marry, or someone I'm married to. Then we try not to have physical interaction with the opposite gender. So you might find a female student who's hesitant to hug, or vice versa, a male student, and if the teacher is a very friendly, huggy person, then he may back away. She may not understand why. It's very important not to interpret negatively. That is the key thing. And I know it's hard, because if it happens at the moment, it could be taken as a slight. But it's very important to understand that a lot of it is from respect, not from scorn. I have seen cases where people who are okay with physical touch, when they're told to back off, they take it personally. Oh, you despise women, or you look down on women. But it's generally in the culture, it's actually out of respect that the man doesn't covet, has touched the woman and then has more feelings for her when he's not supposed to. So it's important to kind of ask, make sure and clarify rather than assume. Especially with kids who may not feel comfortable actually explaining things. They may just be that's the way they do it, and they don't have all the tools to explain why they do things. And again, same thing, talk and communicate. You may find Muslim parents who the kids, boys or girls, are okay with physical touch and everything is hunky-dory, and some are fairly, I don't want to stereotype, but generally the lower income status are generally more conservative. So the refugees may be more conservative than the immigrants who are, tech professionals or whatever. But again, you may find refugees who are fine with touch and whatever, and you may find tech parents who are very conservative and against touch. But some things to be aware of: ethnic identity. So many of them have identities beyond Islam. So they're not just Muslim, they're Somali, they're Ethiopian, they're Eritrean, they're Egyptian, which means they may have classes they go to after school to teach them this other language, this other culture, and so on. So be aware that they're not a single dimension. Islam in and of itself is one aspect of their identity. It is not the only other aspect. It's not like American and Muslim, because Islam is 1.6 billion people, so there's a lot of cultural diversity within Islam. Chastity and marriage, illicit substances. So Muslims tend to be fairly conservative on the social scale on both of these issues. So anything that alters the mind is forbidden. That doesn't mean you won't find Muslim kids with drug problems or who smoke marijuana and so on. But generally, from the parents' perspective, most will be socially conservative, yes.
Does that include like antidepressants or stuff like that?
No, for medical reasons it's okay, but what you'll find is with psychiatric care in general and mental care, a lot of Muslims, not all, don't want to generalize, but many, especially the refugees, don't have the depth needed to actually handle the problem. Like they just wish if the kid has depression, they'll tell them, pray harder, just if you have a nicer heart, or if you're closer to God, then it's going to go away. And sometimes that's true. Sometimes it's just a phase, but sometimes it's also really like they need medication to balance a chemical imbalance in the mind. So there's no amount of prayer that's going to make it better, and so they take time taking those seriously. So you also run into that. And then I'm going to skip. The last point I'll close with, I'm a little over time, 1-2 minutes more, is the biggest issue that faces Muslims in America right now is Islamophobia. Islamophobia is the irrational fear of Islam and Muslims, just like homophobia. If a gay person is coming at you with a rifle, that's not homophobia. But homophobia is the irrational fear of a homosexual person. Likewise, this is making Muslims out to be much, much scarier than they really are. What this slide is trying to say is that it's not an accident. One of the problems we face is that people think that Islamophobia is normal because, America is always harsh against new immigrants, but then it gets better. That's partially true. But it's also partially false. There are people spending money since 2006 onward, 2008 onward. These foundations fund these research foundations that then produce false research that implies that Islam is inherently flawed, that Muslims are inherently more prone to violence than other people. And then it gets featured on Fox and right-wing media and Alex Jones, and it becomes a microphone to project this stuff. The public sentiment against Islam and Muslims today is worse than it was in 2006, and in 2006 it was way better than 2011. The public sentiment in 2001. The public sentiment today is worse than it was in 2001, after 9/11. That means there's somebody actively making it that way. It's not just, it's not natural that after 9/11 to be here, and then 2006 it would be here, and then 2008 it will go up, and then start going up again. I don't have the chart here, but this is the chart showing that the public sentiment in Islam is actually getting worse year over year, the last 6 years or 8 years, because of this. There's somebody's paying money to make it worse. It's not simply an act. And these two reports called Fear Inc. by the Center for American Progress, highly strongly recommend you guys read them. This is the other problem that I'm very grateful that you guys are not doing that here today. You're doing the right thing, which is otherization. This is talking about the Muslim ban, 2017, Trump's ban, in CNN, Fox News, NBC. How many times they talked about it? How many times they had a Muslim on the panel? You see the problem, right? This is less than 10%. More than the fact that the Muslim viewpoint may not be considered, the worst thing this does is it cements the notion that Muslims are squirrels, right? When you watch National Geographic, there's squirrels running around doing stuff, and then there's a voiceover, right? What's his name? The guy from BBC, Alan, whatever. So there's a commentator, Morgan Freeman, saying, "Oh, well, the squirrels are doing this," and because the squirrels can't speak for themselves, right? The squirrels cannot express themselves. They're too primitive. They're too behind. So we need the voice of somebody from our culture to explain to us what these little squirrels are doing. This is the worst thing this is doing, right? Is it cements the notion that we can't speak to these Muslims. We can't rationalize with them. We have to bring an expert from among our midst. There are tons of Muslim Americans who can speak. You'll see amazing examples who can speak. You'll see we have our guest coming, Zahra, next week. She's an amazing speaker as well. And so there's no shortage of good speaking Muslims. But this is a problem. And this is, you see, even well-meaning liberal, or I don't know what CNN is, news outlets. So I will close with this. This is a study by the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding from 2017. This came out in February or March. I think the 2018 one also came out. I just didn't have a chance to copy it. And for you guys, I want you to look at this slide and the next one. Okay? Muslim families are most likely to face bullying. This is reporting that their children experienced bullying in the past year because of their religion. This is K through 12, public school system. Okay? Muslims are twice as likely as anybody else. So this is never experienced it. This is once in the past year, a few times in the past year, and then almost every day, and then like don't know, refuse to answer. So Muslims are 43% or so chance that it happened at least once a year. Jews, the next group, are at 21%. Right, so they're twice as likely as anybody else. This is what I meant at the beginning of the most targeted group. The one that I want you to think about is this. Who has bullied your child? Total respondents, okay? K through 12. Another student or group of students, a teacher or other school official, both student and school official, anonymous source. This is the part that I need you guys to think about. When a school official is the bad guy or one of the bad guys. This is the part that we need your help with addressing. And Jasmine will provide examples. So with that, I will be quiet. I will hand it over to you, Jasmine. I'll give you also the mic.